We have an industrialization of agriculture that is reliant on fossil fuels and highly toxic chemicals, highly hazardous chemicals that are making people sick. I think what really resonates with most people around the food system, which is like something that's connected to our culture, to our families, to the place where we live, like ecologically and culturally, and centers food as something that's personal, very community based, and reflects a politics of food, kind of, really much different than the increasingly industrialized model.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to our podcast, The Zero Hunger Project. I'm Sumen,
I'm Stacia.
and today we're going to have a conversation with a friend of mine who I've known for years, but is doing some amazing work in the food area. So we're going to welcome Dr. Lauren Baker to this conversation. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you both.
I'd like to read your bio if I could, just so people can understand where you're coming from. Dr. Lauren Baker is the Deputy Director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a systems thinker, skilled facilitator, and practical problem solver. Lauren has worked for over 20 years in not-for-profit, government, academic, business, and philanthropic contexts. With Global Alliance members and partners, Lauren leads the program strategy and supports diverse organizations and initiatives, including the True Cost Accounting Accelerator. I'm interested to hear about what that is. Transformational Investing in Food Systems, and the Agroecology Coalition to address global challenges related to climate, biodiversity, food security, and equity. Previously, Lauren led the Toronto Food Policy Council, a citizen advisory group embedded within the City of Toronto's Public Health Division, and was founding director of Sustain Ontario, the Alliance for Healthy Food and Farming. She has started two businesses, Annex Organics and Urban Harvest, with a PhD in environmental studies focused on biodiversity, biotechnology debates, and food policy in Mexico. Lauren taught at the University of Toronto and Toronto Metropolitan University. My goodness, you've been busy.
Lauren, we heard your bio, of course. I don't know how she finished reading it so quickly. But I think one thing that many who's listening really want to know, what is this Global Alliance for the Future of Food, and what do they do, and what's your role in that?
Great. Yeah. First of all, it's so great to be with both of you and have this conversation. The Global Alliance for the Future of Food, I mean, it's a very ambitious organization and title. The Global Alliance for the Future of Food.
Sounds gutsy.
Yeah, and we need many global alliances for the future of food at all scales and levels, and our alliance is an alliance of philanthropic foundations. So I work with foundations, philanthropy, funders, donors, and partners. But our membership is philanthropic foundations working mainly based in the United States, a little bit working in Mexico and Brazil, and India and Europe. So we have 28 members. And from a pure membership perspective, we're actually a small organization. But as you can imagine, these philanthropic foundations have partners all around the world. And so I had the great privilege of working with partners all around the world who are trying to solve the same problems you're trying to solve. We're trying to solve the issue of hunger, who are trying to elevate the food, climate, biodiversity, health nexus. And we have a number of strategies to do that. And really, as an alliance, we're unique because we're not a pooled fund. So a lot of times foundations and philanthropy come together to create pooled funds. We were created to really focus on strategy. What can be done where no one foundation or organization can do it alone? What is a shared strategy? How do we think about the future of food? And when we think about the future of food, we think about future of food that's renewable. We have these 7 principles. Everybody signs up to these principles, and they guide our vision. And often we ask ourselves, like, is this aligned with our principles? A future food that's renewable, resilient, equitable, inclusive, healthy, diverse, and interconnected. And so we work, on a number of issues related to advancing those principles.
We've been talking with lots of people about all kinds of things. I'm not in food security necessarily, so I've been learning a lot. And I think the things that I don't know are likely representative of the things that a lot of people don't know about this incredibly important discussion. I'm more of a social justice person, and for me, these two concepts are inexorably linked. But I'm learning lots of things. One of the things I learned about yesterday was about food systems and what that all means. And one of the questions we were talking about was about transforming food systems. What does that mean? Like, can you just walk that through for the average person to understand what that means and how they can participate and all of those things?
Yeah, I the way that I think about it is like where are we now, and how are we moving, where are we moving from, and what are we moving to in the food system? So in terms of where we are right now, we're in a food system that causes a lot of harm. It's not healthy, and it's growing increasingly unhealthy. People don't have access to healthy food. We have an industrialization of agriculture that is reliant on fossil fuels and highly toxic chemicals, highly hazardous chemicals that are making people sick. And so there's like a whole bunch of reasons like why our food system needs to move, from that model. And then your question is like, what are we transforming to? And, we're really transforming to a food system that reflects the principles I just shared, but also that shifts power from corporations to people. I think in your last podcast, you talked about food sovereignty, really upholds the values of food sovereignty, upholds food as a human right, and really thinks about the role of food much differently. It takes it from the market, and we have a highly concentrated food system, so it takes it from the hands of a few players to, I think, what really resonates with most people around the food system, which is like something that's connected to our culture, to our families, to our the place where we live, like ecologically and culturally, and centers food as something that's very personal, very community based, and reflects a politics of food that is kind of really much different than this like increasingly industrialized model.
That's interesting. So, with the work you're doing, and of course, I'm asking this question not only wearing the hat you're wearing right now, but also your understanding of the food and food policy and everything, especially in developed countries right now. We are seeing hunger being a huge challenge. And when I say hunger, there is uh, I wouldn't say a divide, but it's not only food security when it comes to growing, but it's also the access to food. Now, when you're working with different countries, different funders, different foundations, do you see that there is also a conversation there trying to deal with access and trying to deal with the hunger challenges in the global north?
Yes, absolutely. And I think everybody is trying to tackle these things wherever you are in the world. And of course, our food systems are really interconnected. So what we do, in Canada or in North America or in Europe, directly impacts the food systems everywhere else. So yes, I mean, your question is about, how are people working on access? And many of the ways that people are working on access to food and the right to food here, like the work that you're doing, is the same in other places too. And some of the more creative strategies that I see is like connecting supply and demand, procurement, really trying to think about how to pull food into our community food environments so that people have access in different ways, and to think about food as an essential service, part of our urban infrastructure in ways that we really don't see food in our urban infrastructure right now as an essential service. And so all of these things, these are kind of common strategies for rebuilding food systems, and there are also strategies for addressing the food systems that are, food system, the way the food system is making us sick, the way the food system prevents people from accessing healthay food and causes like the patterns and dynamics that cause hunger.
I think as a lay person in all of this, I think one of the most frustrating things I keep hearing is the politicization of hunger and food security and the commercialization of the whole thing. The fact that you have to come up with a compelling argument to get people to understand the food is an essential service is mind-boggling to me. That you have to come up with creative solutions to get people to understand that access to clean water and healthy food is a human right. Exactly. You come across the bureaucracy of that every day, and for the average person, I think there's an assumption, a deeply misguided assumption, as it turns out, that this is just something that's done, and it's not at all. You have to campaign for these ideas, and that's inconceivable to me.
Yeah, and I think it's the disconnect between rights, responsibilities, and obligations, right? I mean, we have a whole rights-based framework, like you're saying, that articulates very well that food is a human right, but we have not created a complementary system of responsibilities and obligations. Like, how are we responsible for upholding that right? And what are the mechanisms to do so? And, we know that at each jurisdictional level, in a way, we've just sort of like given up on government's responsibilities for, providing adequate food and nutrition for people around the world. And I think some of the most creative solutions are putting that back into the public sphere and making some of these problems really visible, right? Like, we really need to face the fact that in Canada, I mean, the numbers are outrageous. And like you said earlier in the call, Suman, just growing. And we see this around the world. These issues are so intersectional. I mean, this is what you're saying too. They're very intersectional issues. They're rooted in justice. They're rooted in equity. We know this. And so how do we, what are some, creative solutions? We have a whole program at the Global Alliance called Beacons of Hope. And we're looking for solutions around the world for how are people addressing these problems? What are the new models, the very creative models that people are drawing on to make sure that people have good, healthy food and that the food system isn't as harmful as it is, that it's moving towards all of those things that we've talked about?
I always toil with this because I know in Canada and various places in the world, we have food as a human right. I think where we are missing is good food is the human right. There's a difference. There's certainly difference between just access to food. And in Canada, if you really look at the legislation when it was signed, it talks about access to food, but it doesn't say access to what kind of food. And I think that is a disconnect that at least I see in my work. Is it needs to be good food, not just food. Heating up a pack of ramen is not a human right. It's upholding human right. So I think that disconnect is there, and I find it wherever I've worked, at least globally, I've seen the same issue in many places. Do you see the same though?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this is why I mentioned also like how if we really want to think about good food through all, like really at the heart of our communities, um, we have to think really differently about so many things, right? I mean, this, like we need to think about how we design our cities completely differently. We need to think about how we design our social services completely differently. We need to think about how we design public space completely differently, and we need a completely different policy environment. And we need to have a whole different kind of economic relationship, actually, with food. In the way that food is distributed and sold. Right now, we leave it to the market, and as well as I that that's actually not working for many people. So, and you work in a food bank or through direct food delivery. And how do we think? And you're advocating for food policy, all of these things. So, how do we really? What can we learn about recentering food in our communities in a different way. And I think that these are the creative ideas that people have. We see them flourishing everywhere, and you know this. But we really need we need to address like the structural barriers that prevent us from moving toward really healthy food environments. And I think you're working on a number of them, and really think about like wholesale transitions. Um, and that's what I'm really interested in right now too. We're working on a number of projects where we're thinking about how philanthropy can work together, coordinate, align, move from fragmented grant making to more systemic grant making in collaboration with other funders, in collaboration with government, to have a deeper impact. And that's a really exciting conversation. What do those transitions look like?
And is that successful? Are you finding people are open to having those conversations? Because it sounds to me like this would be a daunting problem. If everybody were in agreement, it would still be a huge problem. But trying to even get people on side to even have these conversations.
It's hugely ambitious. And yet we see places where this is working. Like one of the places that I'm very inspired by is Andhra Pradesh, India, where they have a very ambitious program that's led by a kind of an agency that's arm's length from government. So government is involved to transition actually millions of farmers away from industrial agriculture. And then by doing so, are improving health, improving access to healthy food. But it is like reconfiguring the whole system and putting the right incentives in place. And it's also like a whole new conceptual model. It's like it's based on women. Women are like, without women at the heart of this, it's like building their social capital is what actually scales this idea. And it's also based on peer-to-peer models, like people sharing information across, within communities and across communities, not this sort of top-down approach. And with that, they've documented really incredible impacts around improving food security, improving yields on their farm, improving childhood nutrition outcomes, like all of these things that we care about, and improving health too, because when people move away from harmful, like agrochemicals in their food system, actually the main driver that we found is that people start feeling better. They don't have rashes, and they're I find this like so fascinating too.
Yeah, I was at FAO at the World Food Forum last year, and they did a presentation, and I sat and listened to it. It was fascinating. You just reminded me of that.
Not for nothing, but I think a whole lot of things would be improved if there were more women involved in them. I'm just saying. But also, I think what I'm hearing about this is if you're creating opportunities and choice for people, that I think is part of the problem, is that in a lot of these places, in Andhra Pradesh, for example, it's probably the number one employer in the region is industrial farming. So because they have no other choice, there's nowhere to go. If there are opportunities for more choice, then the hope is that people will orient themselves to something that's more sort of nurturing and beneficial for the community, right? So how hard is it to do that?
Well, right now, I just got back from a meeting last week where we were working with colleagues from Tanzania and Kenya who have recently developed national agroecology strategies. And so, in that conversation with government colleagues, it's like thinking about how to make political space for these ideas, because right now these ideas are actually very niche. So that was one really interesting element of the conversation. But then the other thing is like how to reconfigure finance and funding flows so that we move from really a pillar that we're kind of stuck in, which is like an area of work around like not for profit work, charitable response to food and hunger, to then creating these bridges of finance to more institutional finance, and then to a different kind of private sector investment that is really outcomes oriented, that isn't just about profit, but there are incentives to improve health, to improve economic viability, to improve the environmental outcomes. And this is really like our work in true cost accounting is really trying to understand that, how we evaluate food systems and how do we evaluate food systems more holistically and create incentives for food systems that have multiple outcomes and benefits. So I think, there was something in there that was so exciting because part of it related to school food and procurement, and part of it related to territorial local markets and strengthening local markets. Most of the work and investment has been on export markets because the theory of change is that, like, you get a job, you're growing cotton or your coffee. I mean, I'm talking about that context, obviously not, but you see a pattern that relates everywhere. So what does it look like to really strengthen territorial markets? You really center women and farmers, their needs, to think about how community food services can really be strengthened and built. And we were talking about really like these particular places, like a county in Kenya, because what is the right unit of scale for this conversation? It has to involve municipal government, and it has to involve the actors on the ground. And this is why I feel like really resonant with the kind of work that you're leading to, Suman.
So currently, especially what you see around the world with the trade wars happening, how do you see that impacting the food system, the global food system?
Well, this is such an interesting moment right now politically, and it's very tenuous. There are very direct and indirect impacts. And I'm not sure. I mean, it feels like it felt a few years ago when we were on the cusp of the pandemic, like so much uncertainty. And so I'm not sure how it's going to impact. But, when you look at the economic impact of, for example, USAID funds being pulled out of the system, there are both, mainly I think the impact will be economic and related to like health crises in the medium and in the medium term. So we are having a whole conversation about this, and for philanthropy, we can't fill that gap. It's philanthropic dollars are way too small. So how this creates an incentive for collaboration again, but also those dollars were not very effective, and they were and they were not tied to more environmentally beneficial outcomes or social outcomes always. So there is a redesign moment here that's really important. I think the tariffs are going to cause a lot of economic hardship in the short term. So what will be the creative responses in terms of people organizing in their communities around this? I think we're going to see an upswell of new initiatives, but we're also going to see a lot of economic pain in the short term.
But do you think with this, the trade war piece rather than the USID, the aid piece, the trade war will somehow help self-reliant of the food system from country to country rather than a more global approach? And if it is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think we're going to have new trade alliances. We already see that really clearly.
And I think we need them, right? I mean, don't you think
We need them.
we've been dependent
absolutely.
on old ones for a really long
Yeah.
time, and we need new ones.
And I think we see, like, already overnight, we have like an awareness that I haven't seen in a long time. Of course, we all, like in the 80s, I feel like, we were like fighting against globalization and this kind of like globalized trade where, we sell our carrots to somebody and then we import carrots to somebody else. Like, none of this makes really any sense. But of course, we also know that trade is really important. So how do we use this moment, I think, to do a few make a few key structural changes. One is create a new terms of trade at its foundation, values of environmental sustainability, equity, and justice and rights. So there is an opportunity there. The other opportunity is to rethink the whole global financial architecture. And I actually think that this is like a huge opportunity to do this right now. And a lot of it is tied to, sovereign debt, for example, the ways that the current system locks in particular behaviors and patterns. And I think people, because of the withdrawal, not only of the United States, but other major donors in Europe, um, there will be more space to have these conversations about A, terms of trade, and B, like the kind of financial architecture that upholds, like really creates an environment where hunger can flourish. Hunger, poverty, inequities can flourish. So I think, we'll see, but the whole financialization of the food system has really left out most people.
100%.
How do you catalyze grassroots organizations? How do you catalyze people into these vacuums that have now been created? How do you get them when there's such competition for those dollars and everybody wants their policy to be heard, and how do you weed through that?
Well, I think we have a number of really important opportunities right here right here at home in Canada and in Toronto. I mean, I think the whole Buy Canadian movement is really interesting. I think people are just going to be more aware, of their purchasing power. And this is like an individual thing. And we don't want to only have these solutions that are based on individual behavior. But I also think people are looking like to the election and will hold our politicians to account around, some of the policy changes that really strengthen our social security programs in Canada, that really strengthen our economic security, that really strengthen our sovereignty, right? And we talk a lot about food sovereignty, but we've never had a political movement around food sovereignty at the kind of national level, any kind of real, attention paid to this. I think people are going to say, like, food is actually part of our national security.
Well, and I just find that crazy that we've never had these conversations, particularly in a country that's so like agriculturally rich across the board. The fact that we've never had a national discussion around food sovereignty is mind blowing to me.
And for many years, we've like really ignored all of our agriculture policy has focused on building export markets. Canada is such an important player globally in terms of what we contribute to food security globally through our exports and through our really important agriculture on the prairies and stuff. But like, what does it look to rebalance that? It doesn't mean we have to abdicate our global responsibility, but I do think we need to pay attention to our domestic responsibility. And there's a way to rebalance this right now, which we have not done. We haven't paid like really any attention to this in the past like 40 or 50 years, maybe even longer.
It's hugely problematic. I think that's one of those things when crisis happens. First of all, my grandmother always used to say, the only thing you can do in a crisis is get out of the crisis. Like, nobody stands around in a house fire wondering how to avoid this in the future, right? You grab the cat and you run. But in these times, the pandemic, what's happening right now, these are the times when all of these ideas get a little bit of air and it sort of rips off the Band-Aid, and you can no longer ignore the wound. And it's sort of like, okay, now is the time, right? You drive across this country, and how many of those crops that we're seeing that we're growing, it's feed versus food. Like, is that feed for somebody else's country? Is that food that's going in our refrigerators? Like, these are the types of conversations that really need to be had by everyday Canadians to understand.
Also have the knowledge to understand that what is happening.
Exactly, because the average person, I'm telling you, does not have that context. And I think that's a part of this whole knowledge transfer thing that I'm learning about is how do we get the information that's in your head and in your head and into my head, into the heads of people that are watching this who have no idea, first of all, the depth and breadth of the problem and how they can even participate anywhere close to a solution, right? I mean, it's overwhelming.
And I think this is where we have to like really bring it back to what's happening in your neighborhood. Like, when I think of my neighborhood, up the street, in the area that I shop in, I was, we're not taking responsibility for the kinds of places that we live in, right? So, I can choose to buy my food online, or I can choose to go to the little, mom and pop grocery store that makes my neighborhood actually alive, right? And I think we have a community food center, a little food hub in my neighborhood that it has a market now. It's providing all sorts of services, community kitchen. I think this is like the right unit now. People can see that when they're walking around. And this is, I think, how people are reclaimed. Like all of a sudden, these things make sense to people. They're like, oh, it's really like a very a fragile system if I'm very reliant on Amazon for everything, right? Or, these things, whereas I know that I can go into the shop up the street. I know I can go into that food hub. I know there's a community dinner, and this is about bringing food back into the heart of our neighborhoods and the way that we design our communities.
It is so interesting you say that. Growing up in India, it was the routine that every morning my dad's going to wake up, going to take the bag, walk up to the market, shop, come home, and while he's getting ready, my mom's going to make the lunch, and he and me we both going to have food and go to school and work, and that is how it was. And here it was the other way around. You go to shop only on the weekend to the supermarket and buy stuff for the whole week. But now, when I visit India, I was there just a couple of months ago. They are embracing this culture of once a week shopping. They're embracing that, which kind of boggles my mind and makes me sad to some extent. And we are trying to get back into the whole neighborhood, get the neighbors. I know the guy, this our local store, their kid goes to same school with me. That having that connection, that's getting lost.
Well, and also it's not always viable for people. I mean, this sort of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's cheaper to buy your groceries at Walmart. It's cheaper to go for a lot of people. That's their first
Huge.
consideration
Yeah.
is that I would love to go shop at a place that has bespoke carrots, but I can't afford that. So I need to feed my family and I still need to keep my lights on and all the rest of the stuff. So, I mean, part of this is
Absolutely.
massively economic. It's politics
100%.
and economics, right? Like
100%.
Yeah, and that's why I think that's why I pointed out. I completely agree. It's like, and the community food hub is about bringing public food infrastructure into our communities. Yes, we love the little health food shop and everything, but we also need this kind of infrastructure where you can walk in to a library, for example, and get a healthy snack, or you have a school meal program. That's why this has like been a huge success to have a national school. Yeah, and that you can have good food, in schools and in your community centers too, so that this is not something that becomes, and you this is all, I know this is all your work. It's like the people who can buy those carrots, and then the majority who can't. And I think that this is like the fragility in the system that we're seeing and that people are becoming aware of as this trade dynamics shift. And even if those trade even if the tariffs are repealed, like in the next month, the damage has been done. Like people see it in a visceral way. They understand the fragility of the economic system. And I hope they're linking it to issues of justice and access in our communities, don't have kind of dynamic that we have created.
I don't know how you can ignore it, frankly. And I think part of the problem, I think this is sort of a good news, bad news situation, but because these tariffs are affecting everybody across the country, it's now, sort of beholden on everybody to pay attention to this stuff versus before it was a sort of, well, it's not happening to me, therefore I'm not terribly interested.
Yes, but I'm still not 100% convinced that people are really looking deep enough to really peel off the layers of onions that is in these tariffs, what you were just talking about, Lauren. I don't know if the common people are still understanding the damage that is actually being done.
Yeah.
It's not only just to your wallet, just to your pocketbook. There's a lot more to it. So
Yeah.
I think that calls for another episode on that topic.
And also I think people need to like get a library card and look at, like,
Yeah.
go to go to the Google.
Sorry, what library? No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. I mean, this is the problem, right? All of
This
these
is
things
the problem.
we get off one soapbox and get on another one. But what are you going to do? They're all inexorably linked, like I said. But, this is where people really need to educate themselves.
Yeah, like maybe I would say too, like I think the way I understand the current dynamic is that there are these rolling shocks and crises now. Like we've had COVID, we have extreme weather events, we have this political disruption and unrest. We have rising, fascist right-wing movements around the world. Like these are problems that are compounding. And so how do we really hold these longer term visions? We need to attend to the emergencies. We need to attend to the immediate crises. But this is why this longer term transition work is really important. And the policy work is really important. That longer term vision and policy.
Rehumanizing all of these big meta kind of concepts and really bringing them back to actual people that are being affected by that.
So, Lauren, by the time this episode's going to air, Canada will have a prime minister. Doesn't matter who it is. So, it
does, by the way. It really does matter.
It does matter. But anyway. But I'm not getting into that conversation here.
That's my job on this show, by the way, in a nutshell, right there. But please carry on.
Yeah. So if you have an opportunity for 3 minutes to meet Canada's Prime Minister, what is that one policy recommendation you're going to put forth that you want from the wearing the hat of the Global Alliance?
Well, we now know we need food policy that has teeth. So we've kicked this around in Canada. To be frank, the response has not been serious enough. We have a huge hunger problem. We have a huge problem where agriculture is resulting in like 33% of the food system results in like 33% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's linked to climate. And we actually need like a whole suite of integrated programs that recenter health, that recenter food access, that recenter environmental sustainability. And we need to be really serious about it. So, it's okay to play around the margins. It's okay to say, oh, this stuff is just niche, but it's not. It's like, a significant portion of percentage of Canadians go to bed hungry every night. And many of those Canadians are children and Indigenous people. So it's like a huge justice issue. And we have a farming crisis right now in terms of the contribution of food systems, food and agriculture to the climate crisis. So we just need to have a very, very strong food policy that I would say recognizes food as a public good in the same way that we recognize in Canada education as a public good, water as universally accessible, and of course, except for in a few Indigenous communities, which is a travesty. But what is like the infrastructure that we're creating for the future? And right now, we're not paying enough attention to food as part of that infrastructure.
So what I'm hearing loud and clear is something that I've been saying for 15 years now. We need a minister of food where the buck needs to stop and who's going to work around every department to bring from agriculture to environment to social services, all of them in the same umbrella and have these conversations.
So you guys need to go talk to those people. I would like to spend 5 minutes in a room with somebody who thinks this is a niche problem. I'd like to sign up for that job because that's a whole other conversation that needs to be had, honestly, because there's this whole notion of this doesn't affect me. It's not my problem. I have other problems I need to deal with. I would like to know, we talked a little bit about pie in the sky, best case scenario for you. I'd like to know what that is. And I'd also like to know, what are the things when you do these interviews that people never ask you that you wish you could bring up that maybe people don't think to ask you?
Well, I think, we do a lot of work in like a global fora, like the climate convention. And so, my pie in the sky idea is that people are really like organizing and making food part of all of this. So it really is like essential for our our future as a planet to have an agriculture and food system that works. And we're just not, like you just said, we're not paying enough attention to it. And I think we need frontline leaders to engage in those processes. I think the thing that I like this question is like, what haven't we talked about yet? And one thing that I've been talking or thinking about, and it goes back to sort of these structural barriers that hold back change, is how a lot of these issues are connected. And hunger is really at the center of this. So the food system is really reliant on fossil fuels, and that drives industrial agriculture. It drives ultra processed foods. And Suman, you said at the beginning of the call, like it's not just any food. Like people can get some food, but it's junk food. It's bad food. And all of this is driven by like a system that has corporate consolidation and concentration at its heart. They're actively trying to transition us away from, like, I think, there's like an active process of moving people away from healthy diets to more industrial diets. So, what I have been thinking about is like, how can we communicate this kind of central lock-in where a number of these problems are really linked and connected, like the problem of ultra processed foods being linked to industrial agriculture, to fossil fuel, and to hold, like having that system held in place really is about vested interests. And so we need to kind of reveal that. And we need to try some new tactics and strategies to address that, like litigation, and other tactics that we can learn, I think, from fossil fuel energy advocacy over the last 30 years. What does the Main Street food system look like of the future? Just like we thought about the Main Street energy transition, like really mainstreaming this. And that's why I talk about like, what does my neighborhood look like vis-a-vis food? And how do we actually work to manifest that at that really local level?
It's about dismantling food system monopolies and how we go, because there's a handful of people in this country that are making decisions for everybody else.
Absolutely.
And they're not necessarily doing a very good job. Which
It's
I get to say, and
unfortunate.
you don't. I get to say, 'cause I don't have any skin in this game, and I understand that it's political, and I understand all
Yeah.
of those things. But for the average person, it's very
But food
very
is
frustrating.
politics.
Yeah, it is.
Food is politics.
Yeah.
You can't leave politics out of food.
No,
It doesn't work.
no.
So, anyways, Lauren, thank you so much. I know we have taken a little more of your time than we originally said, but this conversation is so important.
It's so
and there
important.
is so much more I wanted to ask you. We'll be here for 2 more hours. But maybe at some point we might get you back to have some other conversations, which is very, very essential.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening to us and watching us, that was Dr. Lauren Baker. We learned so much about food systems and what we need. And I go back to the same thing. You, who's out there listening and watching, you have the power. You heard Dr. Lauren Baker talk about organizing. And that is important because if we don't ask, we don't get. If we are satisfied with food that is not good for us, that's what we're going to get.
Yeah.
So talk with your wallet, speak with your wallet, speak loud and clear. Ask people coming to your door knocking for votes, ask the right questions. Tell them what you're facing and what you need. Thanks for joining us, and please subscribe. Looking forward to you next week. Thank you.